How's it going, everybody? It's Warren. Welcome back to the Cosmic Wonder, where we talk all things Marvel and everything relating to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we just got Wandavision episode 4, and it did not disappoint. Now, as we knew from an exclusive clip that Marvel gave us literally hours before Wandavision episode 4 came out, this episode was from Sword's perspective, and of course some other main characters as well, such as Darcy Lewis, who is back from Thor, Jimmy Woo from Ant-Man and the Wasp, who worked for the FBI and was keeping watch of Ant-Man, Scott Lang himself, and now we have Monica Rambeau working for Sword. And as we got into the episode, it was nice to know that Sword really didn't have a good idea of what was going on. They really didn't know more than we did as fans. But this episode was very revealing. It answered a few questions, but of course, as Marvel Studios has been great at doing with WandaVision, left us with more. Now, fast forwarding really quickly to the end. Monica Rambeau said that it was Wanda controlling everything, but I don't believe that to be true, and I'll explain that in this video. I'll do a scene-by-scene breakdown explaining all of the really important details that you need to know, because there are many in this episode, and then at the end I'll talk about a theory that I think Marvel is really trying to get us big with misdirection here, and I believe they're really trying to keep us from knowing what is really going on. Specifically, they don't want us to know who the actual villain is. So let's jump right into it, because there's a lot to break down. So the opening scene starts with Monica Rambeau, and this is not the first time that we've seen Monica Rambeau in the MCU. She was actually the little girl in Captain Marvel, the daughter of Maria Rambeau. And actually, if you pay attention very closely, you can hear some voices in the very opening scene as Monica Rambeau's body is kind of coming back together after being blipped. We can hear Captain Marvel call Monica Rambeau when she was a kid Captain Trouble, a direct callback to Captain Marvel. Now, as the scene goes on, we can tell that Monica was actually snapped, and this is the part where she's coming back after Hulk brought everybody back. And it's a really awesome scene and very different perspective than we've seen in the MCU so far. In Spider-Man Far From Home, everything kind of seemed a little bit happy. They kind of talked about everybody coming back a little lightheartedly. They showed people in Spider-Man Far From Home coming back still being in band uniforms, but in this episode we see how actually it was very chaotic and nobody really knew what was going on at first, and everybody was extremely overwhelmed. Monica then sees a doctor that she knows after roaming through the hall of the hospital. Monica obviously has no idea what has happened, and neither does the doctor, as she asked, "Where did you go?" The doctor clearly knows that she was snapped and everybody is coming back, but has no idea what happened to them when they were gone. And according to Monica, it was just as if she fell asleep and woke up right away. Unfortunately, in this scene, the doctor tells Monica that her mother, Maria Rambeau from Captain Marvel, has sadly passed away. You have to remember that there's a 5-year gap from Infinity War, when everybody was snapped, to when they came back in Avengers Endgame. So, Monica got snapped, but her mother didn't, and in that 5-year period of time, unfortunately, she died. But Monica doesn't really understand that, because she doesn't understand that she was snapped, she doesn't know about the events that took place, and to her, she was only gone for about a second. She was with her mother, she fell asleep, woke up, and then everything was thrown into chaos. The doctor eventually tells Monica that she disappeared. Then we cut to the Marvel intro. Then we appear in the Sword headquarters, which stands for Sentient Weapon Observation Response Division. This is another branch of S.H.I.E.L.D. In the comics, they are basically the same thing as S.H.I.E.L.D., except Sword is responsible for outer space. We see on the screens that everything is kind of going back to normal. The people who were snapped are coming back. Everybody is celebrating. The Pope's about to speak. Monica used to work at Sword, and she tries to get through a door, but can't because she's lost her credentials because she's been dead for the past 5 years. Director Tyler Hayward comes and lets her inside of the door. And as she's walking to the door, we see a picture of her mother on the wall. It reads Maria Photon, which was her nickname, Rambeau. We learned that Monica is the first of those who got blipped or snapped to report in for work. No surprise there, not a lot of people would be too gung-ho to go back to work after you've been dead for 5 years. We find out that Monica used to be an astronaut in some way, shape, or form, and she's been into space at least one time before. However, the director says they don't focus on that anymore. Instead, now they focus on robotics, nanotech, AI, and sentient weapons. Now, this is most likely due to Tony Stark. Robotics are technically all of the Iron Man suits. AI was Jarvis and Friday, his AI that operated inside the suit and basically operated everything else with Stark Industries. Nanotech we saw Tony Stark introduce in Avengers Infinity War, and now we are kind of starting to explore the side of sentient weapons. The director says the world is not the same now, there's a lot of threats in space, in which Monica replies there's always been a lot of threats, but also allies. This is referring to Captain Marvel. Marvel. We learned that Monica's mother Maria was the founder of S.W.O.R.D., or at least one of the founders of S.W.O.R.D., which makes sense given the fact that by the end of Captain Marvel, she had a relationship with Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D., Captain Marvel, and the Skrull. They go into an office which looks a lot like the office that Nick Fury was in at the end of Captain Marvel. But in the same building, offices often look the same, so it could be a different office, but it does look like Nick Fury's, or what could have been his before. We know he definitely got a few promotions since we saw him in Captain Marvel. The director tells Monica that she is grounded and can only do terrestrial missions, meaning missions on Earth. This is a protocol that her mother put in place for people who would come back from the snap before she died. So she's asked to go help out the FBI with the missing persons case in Jersey. Here we meet Jimmy Woo, who was in Ant-Man and the Wasp, working for the FBI still in charge of watching over Ant-Man. He introduces himself with a card trick, and if you recall in Ant-Man and the Wasp, he was really fascinated with how Scott did magic and he was trying to learn on his own. It appears that he has learned. Agent Woo explains that he has a missing person that he originally thought ran away. But then he says he contacted the person's relatives and friends and none of them even know that he exists. He then says it gets even weirder when he goes to the cops and he asks them about Westview, and they say that the town of Westview doesn't even exist, even though the sign for it is right behind them. Now I believe that this is directly linked to the villain of the show. Something has erased people's memories of Westview, but clearly there is a whole town of Westview. Wanda didn't just create this town out of nowhere. There was a sign for Westview off of the highway to exit, and then they have a sign right before you enter the town. So something has come over people outside of the bubble and inside of the bubble that makes them forget about Westview and the actual reality of everything. Agent Woo then says this is the case of a missing town, not a missing person, and Monica asks why he hasn't gone inside yet, and he says, "The town doesn't want me to." Monica takes a drone, which would end up being the helicopter that we see in episode 2, and flies it into the energy field. It disappears from plain sight. Monica then goes up to the energy field, sticks her hand in it, and it sucks her in, revealing how she got into this alternate reality that somebody has apparently created and how she has become a character on the Wandavision show. We then go to a scene with Darcy Lewis, who used to work with Jane Foster from both Thor movies. Her and a few other doctors are being transported to Westview in a van, and she asks them all what they do, and they all do very different things, which she says means they have no idea what's going on. That's why they're bringing in a bunch of different experts so they can find out. We then find out that she is now Dr. Darcy Lewis, and she's brought into her workstation and asked to make an assessment. And her assessment is they are getting a ton of CMBR, cosmic microwave background radiation. She says that there are longer wavelengths superimposed over the noise here. She then busts out a device that allows her to see inside of the bubble. It's older technology that can pick up on the wavelengths. Now, CMBR, cosmic microwave background radiation in real life, is said to be a remnant of the Big Bang, or the start of the universe. This could have serious implications on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in the older days when they had TVs like this, cosmic radiation was the cause of static in the old TVs, which is most likely what they're getting at here. But this will most likely come into play in the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We then see the different perspective of the Beekeeper. We see it from S.W.O.R.D's and the Beekeeper's perspective, and they are trying to go down a sewer drain under the bubble to try and get in. However, it does look like the bubble doesn't exactly stop at the ground. It does have a radius that is a full circle or hexagon, as we'll find out. As the S.W.O.R.D. agent goes in, we cut to the director asking for some sort of a visual of what is happening inside of this energy bubble. This is where we find out that Darcy has found a way to watch what exactly is happening inside. And here's where a very, very important line from Darcy comes in, where she says, "I know it's been a few crazy years on this planet, but he's dead, right? Not blipped, but dead." Obviously referring to Vision, who died in Avengers Infinity War. Darcy explains that inside of the CMBR, there was a broadcast frequency that she picked up with an old television. That's how she's able to watch inside. However, she doesn't know much more outside of that. She doesn't know if it's real time. She doesn't know if it's somehow pre-recorded. She doesn't know why it's a sitcom. She basically knows about as much as we do as fans. Agent Woo says, so the universe created a sitcom starring two Avengers, and Darcy says that it's a working theory and she really doesn't know how it works. And then it looks like she never got her coffee, which is sad. Someone needs to get her some coffee. But it does reveal, however, that in the previous episodes, when we saw somebody watching them, it was indeed Darcy. From here, Agent Wu's team starts to try and figure out who exactly everybody is. He says that originally this case started as a missing person case, which I think is notable. We have no idea who this missing person is, but they were in witness protection, which means they are somebody of some sort of a value. And although we have no idea who it is, Agent Wu does say that it was a him. And I do have my theories on who it could be, more on that in just a bit. Wu says they've identified 2 people, who are of course Wanda and Vision, and it's time to identify the rest, and the team goes to work. They start identifying people, and they realize that the barrier is actually a hexagon. Now, we've been really spotty about the hexagon so far, and we've been asking why, and Agent Wu is asking why as well, as we can see on this whiteboard. We can see that the hexagon barrier has a 5-mile radius, and they don't know why it's a hexagon. Now, there's many theories surrounding this right now, none of which are confirmed yet, but some of them are that it's a hexagon because Wanda has cast a hex, or a spell. Another is that a hexagon has 6 sides, and 666 is the sign of the devil, aka Mephisto, who we believe to be the main villain. Another is that the hexagon is a symbol for aim, and somehow they're with Hydra and have something to do with taking over this town and Wanda. Again, more on that in just a bit. Sword starts to find out more information about more people inside of this town. And one thing that is definitely worth noting is the profile of Abhilash Tandon, who plays Norm. At the very bottom of his profile, we can see that it says, Abhilash expresses concern for his father and sister. This information was obtained when Vision awakened him. Is Wanda controlling a whole town? Physical safety of residents is now in question. When Vision releases him, Abhilash becomes Norm again. So it appears that off-screen, we didn't see it ourselves in any of the episodes, but when Vision comes in contact with Abhilash, or Norm as he's known inside of the bubble, Norm awakens and he remembers everything that happened before he was put in this bubble. But then it says Vision released him and he goes back to being Norm. This is going to be a major factor moving forward in Wandavision. It appears that Vision has the ability to release people from this spell or this trance, whatever is happening to them. But he also has the ability to put them back in. So, is Vision alive? Is he dead? But most importantly, is somebody controlling him? Now, eventually they find out a lot of information about a lot of people inside. And eventually, Darcy does end up seeing Monica Rambeau on the TV. And here's where a pretty important line is dropped by Agent Wu. Darcy says that it looks like Monica Rambeau has to play undercover. She says that it looks like she has to play along, in which Agent Wu says, with whom or else what? And this is a really big giveaway of what could be happening, tying into the last episode where Agnes and Herb were saying, we are all, and it cut off, but we believed that they were going to say, trapped here. Darcy then has an idea about a way to kind of communicate with Wanda, and we discover that it was Agent Wu who was trying to communicate through the radio with Wanda in episode 2. Now, a few major things to note here. As they discover all of these people inside of the town, they discover Agnes, but they don't know who she is in real life. Again, we believe she is Agatha Harkness, and there is plenty of evidence for this. But Agatha has lived for centuries and centuries since the Salem witch trials that started on June 2nd, which, by the way, is what she says the anniversary date is with her and Ralph. But the fact that she's lived for centuries is most likely why they can't find anything about her. A person like that probably isn't inside any databases, as that person probably doesn't want to be. But this fact also means that she definitely is playing some part of what is happening. The same goes for Dottie. They actually don't have any information on Dottie up at all, not even a picture or her name inside of the series. But it is very apparent that she is seen on screen, and Darcy says she's talking with a new character, and Jimmy Woo says a real person, which I don't actually believe to be so. I think she's a villain. As Randall is talking to her, Dottie ends up breaking the glass, cuts herself, but Wanda makes that part skip over. And to the outside looking in, it never happened. Then we cut back to the sword agent going inside of the bubble through the sewer, and as he passes through the energy bubble, he becomes the beekeeper. So it seems like whenever somebody goes through this energy field, it turns them into whatever is appropriate for the time, meaning it changes their clothing. This is what happened with Monica. She went in with her sword attire on, but her clothes were changed. However, it did look like her sword badge was turned into a sword necklace. So there are still some remnants of the real life that transfer over into this bubble reality. reality. They just change a little bit. So the beekeeper went in with a sword hazmat suit on, but then as he went through the energy field, it turned into a beekeeper suit. He pops out of the sewer and we see Wanda and Vision, and Wanda says, no, but it is a little different than we heard in episode 2. But unfortunately, we don't really find out what happens to the beekeeper. And right now, this is one of the bigger questions that we don't have an answer to. When Wanda alters reality, what exactly happens to other people who are being changed? We then go back to Sword, who now has many different TVs looking inside of the bubble. We are reaching the final scene from the last episode, episode 3, where Wanda is giving birth. And this is where things start to get really intense. Monica, inside of the bubble reality, says Ultron, in which that surprises Darcy and Agent Jimmy Woo, and they say, has that ever happened before? Has this bubble reality ever referenced the actual reality? They say no, and just as Wanda is getting very, very scary, more like the Scarlet Witch, the scene cuts. Darcy says somebody is censoring the broadcast, and then they ask where Rambeau is, in which the alarm goes off because she just flew back into the main reality. But then we see what happened from Monica's perspective when she was talking to Wanda. Wanda is now very, very intense and very scary. She asks Monica who she is, and she says, I'm just a neighbor. Wanda replies, then how could you know about Ultron? It appears that Wanda has sort of broken out of the fake reality she is in at the moment and is remembering the old reality. Wanda says you're a stranger and an outsider, and we see her magic come into play, which we haven't really seen much. Most of the magic that she's done so far, we haven't seen the red energy surrounding it. She says, I think you should leave, and she uses the magic to get rid of Geraldine, aka Monica Rambeau, and send her back into the main reality. But a few things to note here. When she brings out her magic, we can apparently hear something in the background. And we could also hear this with the energy field. It's the exact same noise, and it does sound like people are talking. Then after Wanda actually throws her out of the reality, she is looking at her magic like it's somewhat new to her, or like she did something that she wasn't really expecting to do. And this is the main part I want to talk about in just 1 second. Wanda realizes what she did, and she fixes everything and goes back to her twin boys. Vision then comes in. He asked, where's Geraldine? Wanda says, oh, she left, honey. She had to go home. In which she turns around and dead Vision is there, scaring the absolute heck out of me. It was literally like a jump scene when I first watched it. He says, what is it? What's wrong? And Wanda looks up again, and he's normal. Now what's happening here is Wanda is remembering her actual reality. She remembers Vision is actually dead. He's not alive. Then one of the most important lines of the entire series is dropped. Vision says, we don't have to stay here, we can go wherever we want. But then Wanda replies, no, we can't. And she says it in an extremely creepy way that doesn't really seem like her. She says, this is our home, and Vision asks, are you sure? In a very concerned manner, like he kind of knows what's going on. Wanda then says, oh, don't worry, darling, I have everything under control. We then cut to Monica Rambeau saying, it's Wanda. It's all Wanda. The final scene is of Vision and Wanda picking up their twin boys, and Wanda goes, well, what should we watch tonight? And if you notice, Vision has an extremely concerned look on his face, but then immediately after, he forces a smile like he's forced to go along with it. Now here's what I think is actually happening. The biggest thing to notice here is that at the end, after Wanda uses her powers to get rid of Monica, she is a completely different person. She says, we can't leave, this is our home, oh darling, I'll take care of everything, don't you worry about it. This is not Wanda. It doesn't sound anything like her. Her voice even changes. And she doesn't call Vision darling, she calls him Viz or Vision. Everything that she does after she uses her magic on Monica is completely out of character. Now we know that there is some kind of a spell put on the people inside of the bubble and even some people outside of it, and I actually think Wanda is under that spell as well. And who is responsible for the spell? Agatha Harkness and Mephisto or Nightmare. Now obviously this is something that Agatha Harkness doesn't want Wanda to know, but other people seem to have figured it out. And this could go back to Vision. It appears that when Vision has contact with people, they seem to remember the actual reality. But if you notice, they're all kind of scared, and this goes back to the line of Jimmy Woo. Darcy says they have to play the role, and he says, for whom? And if not, what? What happens? What are the consequences? Well, it could be that all of these people are under a spell by Mephisto and Agatha, and they realize that if they don't go along with everything, they're going to have to deal with them. Vision seems to be somewhat aware of this at at times, but I do think that he is going to end up being the key of awakening, like the one report said, the people in the town, and ultimately Wanda. Now, I do think that she is under a spell. It's not all Wanda. Yes, she does have some power over this reality because herself is a witch and has very powerful powers, but the second things don't go as Mephisto or whoever is behind this wants them to go, she has no power. Just like she was trying to get rid of the stork in episode 3, she couldn't get rid of it. She can basically do what she wants as long as it's in line with what Agatha and Mephisto want. The second it's not, they correct it. They change the reality. This is ultimately what I think is happening. Wanda is being controlled by somebody. But let me know what you think is happening in the comments down below. Do you think it's Wanda, or do you think somebody else is behind it? Let me know, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the latest Wandavision videos. Don't forget to like the video, and for live updates, you can always follow me on Instagram and Twitter. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.